Right, the flesh pots of France. Thank you for that. Couple of things. First of all, it was November 2011 and not 2012, but I'll let you have that one. Just to explain a little bit why the two of us are here today. Jan Joubert, alongside me, was actually a very invisible but key component of the delivery of the original G-Cloud program. He was invisible to many people, but not to a lot of SMEs around the place, because Jan spent an awful lot of time for me talking to the SME market and new suppliers, just the sort of people that we wanted on G-Cloud. And you can imagine back then we were some trepidation about how many suppliers we'd get on the first iteration, first pass of G-Cloud. And Jan's work really paid off, because some of the most successful names on G-Cloud today, the SMEs, Jan talked with extensively and brought to me to try and convince them that this was something that we were serious about doing, and that all worked very well. And since then, Jan has set up Rainmaker Solutions with a number of other old G-Cloud mates of mine, people like Tim Hanley, who was the technical architect for G-Cloud, and Mike Bateman, who's here, I'm sure, somewhere today, who was the original Ask Mike, when you could phone up and say, oh shit, I can't find this sort of service, where might I find it, or how do I do this, or how do I do that? You know, in the good old days of paper and string, Mike held all that together for us. And Rainmaker is an organisation that uses those people to help support private sector organisations wanting to sell into government through G-Cloud, and also departments in their transformation and their purchasing through G-Cloud. So a really critical player for me and for G-Cloud in the early days. But particularly today, talking about unacceptable stuff, last time when I did that back in 2011, there was no supplier side to G-Cloud. It didn't exist at that time. We hadn't got it. And now, of course, we have a massively extensive supplier side to it. So I thought it was appropriate, really, in the spirit of user centricity, that what I have today is the two of us talking about this, me from my perspective on things, but Jan's, who's got a very real and immediate perspective as an SME using G-Cloud. So we'll give it a go on that basis. Okay?
Yeah, very good.
Right.
Unacceptable One was a great catalyst, actually, because it was that catalyst that flicked a lot of suppliers who were pretty disbelieving about whether or not G-Cloud itself would achieve anything real. Yep. Because for far too long we'd been dealing with a lot of department promises about innovation and SMEs that just were never real. So
that's absolutely true. Okay, so lots and lots has changed in the intervening time. I mean, some really great work has done. I was privileged enough to get GDS underway and the first alpha of .gov.uk off. But there's fantastic work been done there by Mike Bracken, Tom Loosemore, a really talented group of people, a list too long to mention, as well, of course, joining in with that at a later stage, Liam Maxwell and the transformation work they're doing. So great stuff has been done, and we speak openly about it now. And I think that, if there is one key thing about it, it's that honest, open debate, like we had from Harry earlier today about the, how shall I describe it, troubled digital services framework product. That open discussion about those things is really critical to improving what we're doing and getting it right. There's no problem about it. We should all just suck it up, the criticism that comes our way, because the important thing is to get on and change it. Somebody mentioned to me the other day that they'd been in a meeting in a department with a departmental lawyer who asked a question around the project they were talking about, just how much work with the users have been done on this. And that in itself told me volumes. I mean, the idea that you would get a government lawyer talking about user centricity in a meeting would have been unheard of. I'm sure I'm being too harsh, maybe to one or two people, but it certainly wasn't in my time. So we've done some great stuff to be really proud of, stuff for users, and Government is commissioning work now, commissioning services from SMEs that is faster, cheaper and more relevant to what they're doing than they've ever done before. And people who need and use services are buying them, not, as we used to so often find, our commercial or procurement experts involved in the buying of products. It just doesn't work that way. We know that now. Costs are dramatically down. We've all seen the 50% figure. And I think Stephen spoke this morning about 90% in 80%. Yeah, Kate mentioned it too. I think what we're seeing is a slight distortion because so many organisations are using Lot 4 support to work out what they need to do, how they do this transformation, how they do the disaggregation, that you've got a disproportionate amount in Lot 4 at the moment. As that starts to move away and that phase moves through, we'll see more and more and more dramatic savings, as I'm sure a lot of the suppliers here today will understand.
And it's clear that the mood has changed, hasn't it? You know, I really think that if you go back 3 years into government and you went to go and see a buyer, it was a very awkward meeting. They weren't generally happy with the quality of service they were getting from their suppliers. And now, through the G Cloud, through a lot of the SMEs and other suppliers that are doing really good work, the mood music in government and with government buyers has changed. It's a lot more positive. We're seeing much better results and we're seeing a lot more quality. The only problem is, are we really seeing enough?
The other good side is to see how at long last, through that work by Liam Maxwell and Mike Bracken, how GDS have broken through into the political arena as well. It was very, very difficult in years gone by getting any politician interested in what you're doing. And all right, you know, a massive, great global recession and a whole load of austerity helps this. But it's the work they did and with Francis Maud that really got them into the mainstream and allowing those SMEs to deliver to government in the way that we've been talking about today.
So we've done a lot of great stuff. We've created a marketplace. That marketplace has traded over £500 million, and I loved Stephen's description of it as being one of the best examples of an internet company in Britain today. We've inspired the creation of new companies, seen massive growth in SMEs, and as a result, far more people have been employed across the country at a time when it was really critical. Most importantly, though, spend is spread across the country. It's not just contained around the southeast, and it's not contained within 8 suppliers. We're spending across over 300 suppliers, as Stephen said earlier, and that's a real critical success. But not just the fact that we're spending across 300 suppliers, we've given thousands of suppliers the opportunity to be in the game, and we've created a much more level playing field through G Cloud. But now what we've got to make sure is that we extend it across all the other frameworks that are coming out, and that we don't have the type of situation that we've created around the digital services framework or the IT services framework, because they are not in the same vein as G Cloud and will not achieve the same results that G Cloud has. And we're seeing that just on the poor take-up on those frameworks. So lots of acceptable stuff, but we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, absolutely true. And just adding to that, it's the importance, and I was frankly, and I do struggle to follow it sometimes, I must confess, and now living in France, I sort of consider myself to be a bit more European than maybe I used to be. What's really essential is that we proliferate this activity throughout so that all European SMEs can find it as easy to engage with government, increasingly easier to engage with their own governments, as well as the Commission. I mean, the Commission is a bit player in it in that sense, but what they can do is they can deliver themselves these new services and give our technology market in Europe the chance to really compete against the Far East and the US in terms of doing business, because we have a massive global transformation of IT taking place from that old world to the new world. It's not just in government, it's across the board. And with the right work by government to encourage the SME market, we can have as thriving an SME market and technology market in Europe as these other 2 places. So I think it's really critical for that. And as Jan says, you know, all good, acceptable stuff, and it is. And many of the things that I spoke about in the first speech I'm not going to go over it today and say they're not happening here or they're not happening there, because we know it's a process that's taking place and it's not going as fast as anybody would want. But nevertheless, we know what those things are. But there are some things that are blocking the way, slowing things down, and not giving us the greatest opportunity to make use of what we've got here. I mean, we still have organisations within central government. I realise central government is the only place the cloud first policy applies, but we still have places in central government that seem to be ignoring Francis Maude's mandate.
This must be CCS's responsibility to support this cloud first policy. This is a mandate from Francis Maude. But where do we see the evidence that CCS are supporting it? Have you tried finding G-Cloud or mention of it through the CCS website? And if it's a cloud first mandate, why is it only across central government? I appreciate it's difficult to propagate things more widely across government, but I don't get it. What's the real excuse for us not being able to propagate a cloud first mandate across the whole of the public sector, having seen the results that we've produced in the central government departments that have used it?
Yeah, and you know, I've always been a proud supporter of local authority work, because I think, you know, there was an order of magnitude difference always in the cost and the efficacy of the IT work done in local authorities compared with central government. We were far, far, far worse off and behind. But I think there still is a huge scope there, and not just local authorities, because we seem to focus on that. But there's a huge health service there where work can be done, and also the whole blue light arena, which is in the same place in needing to change. And as well as that problem around not following the cloud first policy, we've also, it's bitterly unacceptable to me that we've still got organisations letting contracts over and way over the 2-year G-Cloud limit. Now, we've proven time and time again that regular competition easily trumps what you get from a long contract. And I go back to the point I spoke about in 11, no apologies for that. You know, I mean, how we can set a 10-year contract in an industry that changes year on year so dramatically, and think that you can write a contract that will enable you to do, you don't even know if that organisation is going to be any good in whatever we need to do in 3, 4, 5 years' time. So the idea of a 10-year contract is not just unacceptable, it's ludicrous.
Well, this is crazy, and also it's more evidence that we need to drive this wider propagation message out there, because recently I came across a local authority that's let a 10-year contract. When I say recently, this is in the last 18 months, to a very large systems integrator. In fact, one of the suppliers locked into the 10-year contract with that systems integrator approached us and said, how can you help us be more agile and deliver value to this authority? And I said, well, you know what? Why don't you take 8 years off of your contract length? Why don't you offer them a more iterative contract and demonstrate to them that you can do something a little bit more risky but far more innovative? And I don't know, maybe they'll get it right, but it's a long way to go.
It is. Yeah, I mean, back from 10 years. I mean, it's all very attractive when you sign up, but rarely does it do anything other than end in tears. I think, you know, that's almost all of us have seen that. You know, if you want to write down a list on 2 sides of a piece of paper of the long-term contracts like that everybody would deem to have been successful, and those that have been less than successful, you know where that list is going to be. But at the heart of this, I think, and this brings out this very point, it's still unacceptable that organisations are buying before they've done their design work. Exactly what are you going to buy before you know what it is you're doing? You know, seriously, I mean, that's flawed in any walk of life. And if we didn't believe it, let's just look at the work that's been done by multiple departments and local authorities and other places where they've redesigned their digital services, and they've done the design. And then once they've done the design, they know what they're doing, and they know what they've got to go and buy, commission, procure, whichever you want to do.
And you know, this is a problem for every supplier in the room, whether you're large or small. It costs us real money in time and resource. You know, if you're unsure or not ready to come out for a procurement through G-Cloud, or just to come out through a procurement, Just rather come and tell us that you're looking for some options, and don't lead us down a long, drawn-out process where you end up pulling a procurement, because it doesn't do the reputation of what we're trying to achieve centrally through GDS and through the G Cloud any good, and it doesn't do any of the suppliers involved any good, because we see far too much evidence now of really short procurement processes through G Cloud achieve the same results in nearly no time. It's unacceptable that procurement folk are still writing specifications and doing the buying. And I think this is what leads to the situation we've just been describing.
Absolutely.
Let the business do the buying and the specifying.
Yeah, that's the way it's got to be. I mean, the commercial and procurement folk have a hugely important part to play, but it isn't doing this stuff this way round. It's at the heart of what makes us slow, it's at the heart of what makes us overpay, and it's at the heart of what gives us little or no innovation when a world around us is changing. And it's unacceptable that we don't have data on IT spend in all of this either. I mean, if we can't do it right in our central organisations, and boy, GDS do it right. I mean, they are loud and public on everything they do. They've even got their framework for data analysis out there, their platform, if you like, for data analysis out there, so that you can have all this data and know all this stuff. And yet we had CCES this morning telling us, well, there was some glitch that says why the digital services framework data wasn't available, when the moment it's possible to publish G-Cloud data, it's published. And down, as Harry Metcalf so eloquently described, down to the invoice level of that sort of stuff. It's there. When we want to see it, it's there. And it gives us so much more information to work on. And that's unacceptable. Not working out loud, not giving us the data, not knowing the data is all deeply unacceptable stuff. And we are still, I'm afraid, despite the work we did early on, with different leadership in CCS, then under a bloke called John Collington, which some of you may remember, who really got G-Cloud, really understood what it was all about, and gave us a lot of support in very tricky times. As Sarah said this morning, you know, she's not really quite sure how we made our way through the legality of that to do it. Well, you know, it wasn't easy, and a lot of smart people worked very hard. But we had a lot of support then from John Collington, who was the equivalent of today's Bill Cruthers in the CCS, who seems to have no idea about what is going on. And we're still seeing that influence in things like the digital services framework. And Sarah was right, you know, it's an iterative process. But, you know, the first one doesn't need to be really that crap. You ought to be able to get it reasonably okay, and then what you do is refine to get a real high standard as you work your way through it. And I hope that's what you're seeing with G-Cloud. Except from time to time, you see in some of the T's and C's and other things that go on there, you can see that old school procurement, CCS type mentality going on, dragging back from the user requirement all the time, making it harder, and then G-Cloud trying to drag it back to the right place from there. It's really not good enough. And frankly, you know, that organisation is not fit for this world in many respects. Whether you can disaggregate it and build it back and get better leadership in there that understands where we're going and put that right, I don't know. Maybe it just needs to not exist at all and we do it in a completely different way.
And it's unacceptable, completely unacceptable, that far too many people within government still think that we should be, or that we can, outsource risk.
Yeah, I mean, that's a critical one, really. And for years, we've had people talk about outsourcing risk. But when things go wrong in government, there's only one place the risk lies, and that's with government and the government of the day. It doesn't rely with some third-party organisation. I mean, I think probably I can only think of in the last 20 years a couple of occasions when a supplier's name has ever met the headlines, and probably that wasn't really justified. That was it was doing them down unnecessary. But the risk is ours, and we need to understand that. It's also unacceptable that we still try. You still see examples of where the public sector seeks to smooth payment profiles, which ends up trapping you in longer term things that you can't get out of when you need to get out of when things change. And it's unacceptable that commercial and procurement teams are still spending half a year or more, if we're lucky, on doing OJUs when they don't need to do OJUs. I mean, the OJU has a very important purpose across Europe, and it's part of the way that G-Cloud is done in the heart of it. But, you know, you don't need to do that for every single little thing you've got, particularly when you've got those services sitting there ready to be taken very easy.
And, you know, and it's not just as an SME, I'm sure, again, this is relevant to all suppliers. But these days, OJUs pretty much exclude us. And I'm going to repeat myself here because we don't have the time, the resource or money to play the long game on stuff that we see being procured the right way in only days elsewhere. Why would we?
And it's funny, as you watch, you know, with the advent of an easier way to buy things, what we've seen quite often is new processes being introduced that add nothing to what you're trying to do to ensure that the procurement and commercial teams are involved when they really don't need to be. And it's just adding, you know, when you're doing a straightforward catalogue process, buying process, you don't need that level of complexity. There are times when their real skill and expertise is absolutely critical, but what's going on is just really creating work for no useful purpose.
And then this is most frustrating of all. We've been engaged through G-Cloud, and our hopes are up, and we think it's all going to track perfectly, as we've had some very good examples of personally, some G-Cloud deals that we've done tracking in the right way. And then all of a sudden, some internal process gets in the way. We think we're all done and dusted, and 6 weeks and longer pass until we can finally get on site and start working. And it's nothing more complex than some internal process getting their heads around a G-Cloud procurement.
Mm-hmm. It's unacceptable too that we're still working with suppliers in contracts that don't allow development by experimentation and iteration. The whole world of any good online services, any good user-centric services are built and refined and designed around the process of iteration. I mean, most people have probably used eBay or Amazon, and you never will see them writing out saying we've got release 47 or this coming next April or whatever. What you see with those type of services is you see them arriving, and suddenly the thing you've been doing on that service just got easier for you. Just got easier overnight, and you go, oh, I didn't need to do that anymore, or that's now there, I can do that more easily from here. And that process of iteration is now embedded. And look at those real high quality services done as well by GDS quite often that have got the iteration absolutely at their heart. Indeed, arguably, G-Cloud itself was built in that way. We know we got it, we knew we weren't going to get it optimally to begin with. But it was based around doing that, enabling you to get it out quicker, but most importantly, enabling you to get real feedback from the users so that we design and develop services that are truly user-centric.
And it must be dreadfully frustrating. I know it's frustrating for us, but it must be dreadfully frustrating to all of the departments and people in government and the suppliers in the room to see examples of us not following this process and not following the good examples that we've seen from SMEs and departments procuring on the basis of understanding user needs, especially when we've seen through those examples such great things being accomplished.
And we need to help suppliers in all of this. We don't want to buy before we design, that's clear, but we do have an idea of the sort of things that we're going to need to do over the coming year or 18 months. And it wouldn't be too difficult to be more communicative with the market and talk individually as departments about the transformation that's taking place, the sort of things that are going to be done. We're replacing a network, we're replacing this, we're replacing that, and start to talk about the sort of things that you're likely to need. And making sure that the supplier market has got an opportunity to see what's coming down the track so it can position itself right for what needs to be done.
A pipeline would be great. A pipeline would give us a great opportunity to have visibility of what's coming down the line. It would give us an opportunity to identify the type of projects where we think we can add the greatest value. It would give us the opportunity to identify projects where we think, you know what, we might need to go and collaborate with other suppliers around G-Cloud and other SMEs who can achieve even greater value by working with us to deliver against that pipeline. It would give us an opportunity to achieve a lot more success.
Absolutely. And we've seen we know there are lots of examples of G-Cloud being used by multiple suppliers to come together to produce a product or a service much more tailored for government's needs and the public sector need than might be without that opportunity to come together. It's really, really important that they do that. We're still seeing some CCS-led pan-government frameworks that have ridiculously, unnecessarily difficult hurdles for SMEs to overcome to get in. It's not acceptable that we continue with that situation. We now know the government and future government, I would hope, commitment to the importance of the SME market to us in terms of the country's growth. And to exclude those by the way that you've set out a framework to be done when it's not necessary is just impossible. And ends up with suppliers locked out for long periods of time to being able to contribute into those services.
Well, we responded to one of those frameworks last quarter, and I'm sure other SMEs in the room will have had the same response that we did when we responded to this framework, and we've been asked to explain our financial position, and we've been asked to submit evidence around our cash forecast and cash pipeline. You know, what is it? Are you trying to exclude us because we're too small, or because we're going to be too disruptive, or because we're going to achieve the right things?
The other thing we're still missing that I think makes the unacceptable list is the fact that we still don't have a way in which suppliers and buyers can openly collaborate on solutioning situations so that others can learn from it. The real tragedy over the years has been the amount of money, the amount of expertise and time wasted developing exactly the same things time and time again to solve exactly the same problems. And we committed quite early on that we would develop this and make that available. Not necessarily done by government, but at least supported by the centre and organisations to get the thing going and let it take its own path then. And it's really disappointing not to have that way of getting people together. And around that buying and selling thing, we're still paying lawyers, both government lawyers and private sector lawyers, huge amounts of money, spending huge amounts of time to continually work over the same problem again. Problems that have been solved, some other organisation, almost 99.9% the same, and we still go back and work it all through again. And that's going on far too often still.
It's unacceptable that we're not seeing development of reusable components of a government platform outside of the excellent but lonely components designed and delivered by GDS.
Absolutely.
Figure that one out.
Yeah. The key thing here, I think, all the way through, for me, since back in 2011, and as demonstrated so many times since, is the importance of the SME in this whole piece. You know, larger organisations have got their part to play, and they're big enough to look after themselves, and they know what they've got to do. But we really have to make sure that what we're doing is not making stuff any harder for the SMEs than it needs to be. And one of the key features that I was really pleased to see was this ministerial commitment to pay SMEs, 80% of SMEs, within 5 days of the invoice coming in. And really, that isn't difficult to do, is it? In any technical sense, there can be no excuse for that. But we saw an NAO report recently that demonstrated this is hardly being done at all. So we're trying to nurture this whole SME community, trying to build a technology-capable industry in the UK. And the very thing that is critical to an SME, payment on time, something that government is very, very capable of doing, we have failed to do. And it was great to see the NAO report calling organisations out over that.
The target is 5 days. Let me tell you, being paid in 50 days would sometimes be an improvement. And I'm sure there's many suppliers in the room that have had exactly the same experience. 30 days would be perfect, let alone 5 days. Just pay us in 30 days, and I'll be very, very pleased. Not being paid in 30 days is unacceptable.
That's certainly true. What's a little bit worrying is that the most senior leadership posts, most senior leaders in certainly central government and across other areas of the public sector don't get what this is about. This is not about a technology thing, an IT thing. This is about enabling the transformation of public services for the time we're in now. We can do this. We have all the technology, everything we need to do it. And the great news is we've seen that it can be done, and we know it's cheaper, and we know people will like it. You know, why wouldn't we do it? Well, that's about leadership, really. That's about leadership at the very top of organisation. And it's really disappointing, frankly, to see that our permanent secretaries on their latest and greatest away day or away week to do leadership and change look to a very traditional, old school organisation who even in themselves haven't embraced the degree of change that is needed. And I think, you know, we need to get to grips with that, and we need to have the most senior leaders really seriously on board with this reform of public services.
And to expand on that, it's unacceptable that as a result of this, we've got nowhere near enough new style technology leaders supporting and leading and developing the change sought by the new chief digital officers that we've got across government.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, let's enable them to succeed.
Absolutely. They've got a big job to do. And they know what they're about. They know what they've got to do. And I know there are not a lot of these people around. There are not hundreds of Mike Brackens and Liam Maxwells and all those other Tom Loosemores, Mike Bevans, all those guys. Denise McDonald's. Not hundreds of those about. You know, they're a well sought after commodity. But if we don't get those people in place, we don't, as Matt Hatton from the Home Office said today, we don't successfully build teams that are capable of operating in a new user-centric way, then we're really going to be in difficulty here. And that's about bravery, part of that. Because we do see very few people, actually far fewer than we would like to see, who are in those roles out in organisations. People like Rocco in Maidenhead, people like Tonino Chiafuni in Warwick County Council, people like Denise McDonough in the Home Office. You start to run out very quickly of those brave people willing to talk about the difficulties, willing to talk about what they're doing, talk about what they got wrong out loud. It's absolutely critical for us.
Most importantly for me, though, is if we really, really want to get this right, we have got to propagate this message across the whole of government. There are still far too many local authorities, trusts, police forces, schools, universities, etc., in the dark about G-Cloud and the digital agenda. We have to support and encourage GDS, and that's really important, so I'm going to say it again. We absolutely have to support and definitely encourage GDS to do the right thing and go broadly across the whole of government and to go loud.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a key part of making this stuff available to people. Now, they've all got different ways that they'll do things, and the end result, if you've got super satisfied users at a great price, you know, able to change in really quickly and respond to users' need, you know, how you get that is not really that important. It's the fact that you do get that that's important. And we know in a huge percentage of places, people are still not getting that. Citizens are not getting it, businesses are not getting it, and the users, the very organisations of themselves, are ineffective often because they're not handled in a user-centric way. So it's really important that that message gets out there. And that's supported above all by sensible work on the frameworks that we put out. Again, we see with the digital services framework, it's gone off half-cock, and CCS just don't seem to be able to get to grips with what is really required in this environment. And the sooner we get those frameworks, particularly around IT, and I would argue that it rolls over into other things too, but particularly the IT frameworks and digital service frameworks, into the hands of GDS so that we can get that new approach to it. until we can build an organisation that independently can understand what's needed, then that's the place it needs to be. But GDS needs some support. It's really disappointing, actually, to see GDS have lost sometimes the binary cultural argument with CCS about frameworks. I think some brutal honesty is needed in those discussions, and maybe a bit of out loud dirty washing stuff done, because it needs to be sorted out, and it's not like GDS to turn away from a challenge like that. Maybe it's going on behind closed doors, but we're not seeing the fruits of that yet. Above all, we're not doing this transformation fast enough. We're not saving enough, we're not focusing on users enough, and we know that can be dramatically improved by the use of SMEs in a mixed economy place here. There's a huge part for them to play in all of this. And I would say, whilst we've got an election coming up, and I can say this not being in the government, can't I, anymore, when we've got an election coming up and people are scrambling to find $1 billion here and $1 billion there, there's probably 10 billion in back office savings that could be made with not only no detriment to services, but actually an improvement in services. You can save that money and get that money out to the front line where it's much better put to use than we're doing now. So, want to do questions? Thank you.